Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Bale Silage, Dealing with Ag Plastics. My name is Caitlin Reeser, and I am hosting today's webinar. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you want to ask a question to either of our presenters, there is a question box, and if you would type in your questions, address them to me as the organizer, I will ask those questions at the end of the webinar. Also, our webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent a link in an email tomorrow. So as mentioned, we have two presenters today. Karen Lindquist, Forage and Beef Specialist at the Ag Info Center, will be kicking us off, and she'll be followed by Tammy Swass, who is the Executive Director of the Alberta Plastics Recycling Association. So with that, I will turn things over to Karen.
Thanks, Caitlin. So today, I'm going to be talking about feeding baleage versus dry hay, mostly about especially the aspects of feeding baleage this time of year. So this, here you go. So this, today we'll be talking about several points here, starting with you have this feed on hand, now what do you do with it? What kind of moisture content you're dealing with, forage quality, battling with quality issues, and finally dealing with net wrap. So you have this baleage. Folks probably got some baleage because it was, you know, the conditions this year were just not that great. So they're wondering, okay, I've got this stuff. Now what do I do? So basically, how you feed this stuff out really depends on some factors here. Several factors actually. Forage quality, which is very important. You'll see, we will see later on here. Moisture content is definitely a big one. Is it whether it's tubed or individually wrapped? What kind of cattle you have to feed? The body condition score of those animals, and how much you have on hand. And of course, what are the feeds you have? So when you're looking at what's in your feed yard, you're looking at what kind of bale silage or baleage, basically the same thing. What kind of stuff you actually have in there. And do you have a legume grass mix or straight grass? Now, I have to make a note here. Haylage is a little bit different than baleage. So haylage is more or less of a chopped up perennial forage mix, whereas baleage is actually the stuff where it's the hay is quite wet and it's put up in bales and then wrapped up in plastic. So it's basically for bale silage, especially with baleage, that's these points, they still apply. So the other thing is that with the baleage, there's also a chance that pretty significant chance that it's going to be an annual cereal or a cocktail mix. Then you got to look at what other feed you have on hand. You have dry hay on hand, green feed, chopped silage, or you have some grain. And of course, mixing on all these, it depends on what kind of feed test you got, and I'll go over that a little bit here later. So speaking of which, what exactly are your feed test results in regards to what you can use for these feeds that you have on hand? So let's go with moisture content. Let's look at that with these different feeds here. So ideally, baleage is usually you want baleage is about between 45 to 55% moisture or a 45 to 55% dry matter. And the reasons for that is, for one thing, frozen bales. The other thing is some of the other factors that I'll explain a little bit later here. For dry hay, you're aiming for about 10 to 15% moisture, which is about 85 to 90% dry matter. And for chopped silage, just for context and in looking at what moisture content for everything else, chopped silage, you're usually looking at 65% moisture, or in other words, a 35% dry matter. So the moisture content, it's always all about the dry matter. And usually half the feed, or the amount that's actually in there, the amount of water that's in the feed, half of it is water. So that's a pretty big thing there. And taking that into account, usually when the feed has a higher moisture content, the more those animals are certainly going to be eating. So there is some limitations with that. Usually, limitations is that rumen gut fill, and when the rumen gets filled up with a lot of water, like especially with the silage, and the more silage they eat, the higher they will eat. But there's a certain point in time where there's some stretch receptors in the rumen that get activated by the amount of volume on feed that's in there. So that's the weight of the rumen. And at some point these receptors become triggered, and then the animal starts feeling full, and that animal stops eating. So that way it can't eat anymore. It's just there's only certain amount it can take in. And by that I mean with the reduced dry matter intake, there's a lower total amount of essential nutrients that get supplied from that particular feed. So in other terms of moisture content, is especially with respect to dry matter, is not so much bale size, but probably a lot more with the bale weight. What exactly, and dealing with what about the dry matter content per bale? What kind of dry matter content do you actually have in something like a baleage? So we'll look at that soon here. So first one I want to look at is some of the changes in how much an animal eats. So common question, how much will my cows eat? So we know so let's just say, for example, I'm just using these some examples here. This is definitely going to change for whoever's going to be feeding whatever they have on hand again. So let's say, for example, we have alfalfa grass baleage at about 55% moisture, 45% dry matter. And the second thing we have is a 1,400 pound dry cow. Now, that 1,400 pound dry cow could be having a dry matter intake, that's DMI, dry matter intake as percent body weight, about 2%. Note here that the 2% value is not the same overall. The amount of the animal that's actually going to eat as per dry matter intake, it will definitely range of what they're feeding. So it can range from 1% with a really coarse, coarse ration like straw, to something as high as 3% with a really high quality, even high moisture feed. So, but this is just, I want to use this just as a nice little average for the calculations we'll be going here pretty soon. So now, how much that 1,400 pound cow is consuming, and we figure that out by using this formula where 1,400 pounds body weight times 2%, what's your intake, divided by 100. So to get 0.2, and that means that cow is going to be eating 28 pounds on a dry matter basis. Now on an as fed basis, if we're looking at that same baleage, and we just divide by the amount of dry matter in that bale, and then we see that as fed, that cow eats about 62 pounds of that baleage. So another thing to throw at you is, if we're looking at a higher moisture feed, it's not necessarily baleage, but can also be silage, then we're looking at that cow could be consuming about 80 pounds or more of feed as fed. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is with feeding silage. So sometimes the questions you should ask yourself, or we ask, or whatever, should hay or straw be included with baleage? And there's no real set in stone answer to this. It really comes down to the forage quality of the baleage that you have. Also comes down to moisture content of that feed, as well as stage of pregnancy of the cows and what other animals you're feeding. Just some note caution with lactating cows or growing animals, especially with straw. Some depends what you're forced with, what kind of ration you have to deal with. But basically, especially with the straw, it's some cautionary because it could certainly bring down the amount of basically energy and protein that's available to those animals. So, but I've heard on other hand, just kind of going a little bit off a tangent, that some producers have had no choice but to feed straw and grain to lactating cows, and then they've had to fiddle around and well, not fiddle around, but know what they're actually doing in order to make sure those cows are getting what they need. The other thing is that other factor to this question we should think about is how many baleage bales do you actually have on hand? Have you underestimated it? Hopefully not. If you take into account the bale weights, what they actually weigh versus what you think they weigh, and as well, not only that, but what kind of feed waste to expect that would certainly happen with feeding this feed out. Now, when we're looking at the moisture content of the bales, again, dry matter matters a lot. So if we're looking at another little example calculation, is to compare the baleage bales versus dry hay bales. So let's say that for comparing these two bales, they both weigh about 1,500 pounds. They both have the same forage type, so from previous, like an alfalfa grass mix type. Now, from that, we start asking ourselves, how much will the 1,400-pound dry cow eat? How much will last longer? Which of those two will last longer? And which will you may probably need more of? So we're looking at a baleage bale again, using the same weights as before, using the same, sorry, not weights, same moisture content as before, which is about 55% moisture, 45% dry matter, versus a hay bale. It would add about 10% moisture or about that 90% dry matter. So, and from that, of course, before we already know that a 1,400-pound cow is going to consume 28 pounds of dry matter per day. So from that, based on again, going back from what I looked over previously, based on a dry matter intake of 2% of body weight, this cow will consume 62 pounds per day of baleage, or again, we're comparing, we're not including both, or 31 pounds per day of hay. Now from that, next questions are fairly easy to answer here. So which one will last longer? Answer is obviously that baleage. Let's see, which one will last longer? Well, let's see the calculations before I'm getting ahead of myself here. Looking at the amount of baleage, that one bale of baleage divided by the amount as fed that cow is going to eat, you get 24.2 days for that one cow to clean up that 1,500-pound bale of baleage. Now, comparing that with the same weight bale of hay, with a lower intake of 31 pounds per day as fed, you see that bale of hay is going to last you 48.4 days for that one cow. So obviously the answer is hay, not baleage, I said earlier, sorry about that. Hay will be the one that lasts a lot longer. But of course, note from this, because you can never say never with all this nutrition stuff, is that a lot of this hay, it doesn't include certain quality factors that impact intake and gut fill, rumen gut fill, including the protein content of that feed, and of course the fiber content, so which is acid detergent fiber or neutral detergent fiber, which measure the fiber content of that feed from what a feed lab does their analysis of that feed, of your feed. So next question is, which will you need more of? And the baleage is certainly the one that you'll be needing more of course, because as we've seen before, it lasts half the time, so you need twice as much. However, there is you have thank goodness the option of, especially if you have different feeds on hand, you could certainly stretch supply of that baleage by mixing and combining your feeds. And how much you use, what kind of ratio you'd have to do with like a baleage with straw or baleage with hay, that kind of thing. That's where the cow bites ration formulation really comes into play. And of course, that's where feed testing is an absolute must and really comes into play with something like this. So dealing with the moisture content, there are some problems with feeding of too high or too low moisture. So with hay, the main thing is that it's high moisture, and with high moisture in hay, putting up hay at high moisture, you get heating and spoilage. And with heating, you get the slumping of the bales, you get the caramelization where the feed smells like tobacco, and it just decreases in quality because the bacteria, the aerobic bacteria in there just degrade everything, and a lot of the feed source, and you end up with not a great quality feed. Second thing is that with baleage, and it's baleage is kind of the Goldilocks principle, where it's again you're looking at whether it's too high or whether the moisture content, is it too high or is it too low or is it just right. So with baleage, whether it's too high, too low, if it's too low, you get the spoilage where you get that mold, you get the mold issue. It's too low, and you open up the plastic of the bales, and all this feed that a good feed looked like it put up, all of a sudden it looks like it just, what happened? And all that, and it just got moldy on you. So the other thing is that potentially you could have heating issues similar with the hay above. Clostridial growth is another problem, especially with the higher moisture baleage, and the same thing with the listeriosis or circulating disease, which is certainly associated with a high moisture silage or baleage. And where that happens is which creates a high pH, and the high pH where you get like above, for silage is above 4.2, for baleage is like 4.8, but and you get a high pH that actually promotes listeria bacteria growth, which if the animals eat it, sometimes mostly associated with the feeding high moisture silage, where it affects the brain of the animals, and it can also affect the pregnant cows too, such like can cause abortion. So let's move into forage quality. Baleage, when it's done right, is really good as a really good quality, really good feed. So when it's done right, you get a greater leaf retention in those bales than you do with hay. Main thing with that is because the nutrient value is in those leaves, and it's really important to get a good quality hay. Baleage, you also get, it's what's called a pre-ruminated feed via fermentation. So that just helps with increasing the digestibility for the animals of that feed. And baleage, kind of like with silage, it's like candy to cows. It's high palatability, so it's really good quality stuff. Boy, they learn to go crazy for it. So there's some factors affecting the forage quality, especially with baleage. You're looking at what kind of growth stage of plants at harvest have been harvested. The timing of baling up that forage, so that affects the moisture content of that feed. Weathering can have an impact, especially with hay. So weathering, and of course, especially when if it gets rained on several times, it can decrease the quality. The same if the swath's been out for a while, they get sun bleached. It also affects the quality. Bale density with baleage, that also plays a role. If it's too loose, there's too much air inside those bales, and that can promote spoilage. The timing of wrapping after bale is also pretty important too, because the sooner you get them wrapped, the sooner that fermentation happens. And of course, handling of wrapped bales. So do make sure you're handling those bales so that the plastic stays intact and up until the point where you're feeding them, and maintain that integrity of the plastic will increase the not increase, but basically ensure that the quality of the bale is going to be maintained, and it won't go downhill if there's a hole, or if there's some hole that was made by grapple fork or anything like that. So with looking at the forage quality with hay versus baleage, weathering is a big thing, especially with the hay. With the baleage, you can save yourself if you've done it up at the right time, done it wrapping up at the right time, as you've seen in the previous slide. That can be a real saving grace. Leaf loss is also a big difference with hay and baleage, because hay has a bigger potential for having that leaf loss with raking, with even raking how many times to get it dry. Probably you even lose some leaf loss when you're baling up the stuff. So, and of course, the again, it goes back when I talked about before, is how that forage baleage gets fermented. That plays an impact. You don't have to worry so much about hay, but the question is with how it's fermented. Is it fully fermented? Is it able to go through that 6 to 8 week period or so, or longer, for that baleage to go to really ensile and just be a beautiful silage feed? Or is it going to be some kind of feed where it's a suspended animation kind of thing, and that usually happens when feed is too dry, or the cold conditions are quite cold for the microbes in that bale to be active enough to do that fermentation. And of course, if it rains, the nutrients decrease. You get a decrease in nutrients saved. It should be an increase in nutrients saved in baleage than hay. So it should be an up arrow rather. So again, looking through the hay versus baleage. Baleage contains less water-soluble carbohydrates than hay usually, and water-soluble carbohydrates are basically plant sugars. So the water-soluble carbohydrates is a little bit lower, so it's the same thing with the silage that you see in there. And the water-soluble carbohydrates is used. The microbes need to use those in production of organic acids with the ensiling process. So the amount of water-soluble carbohydrates that are in the feed is important to ensure that you get good fermentation happening. Even though that there is less of that WSC, there is little effect on forage quality, because basically the organic acids are already produced in the rumen. So it's like I said before, it's that pre-ruminated feed. Okay, I'll just go back this way here. Okay. And finally, when you're looking at the baleage, one thing to note is that there is some protein degradation that does happen in baleage and silage. So the forage protein can some of that forage protein can be degraded into that non-protein nitrogen. So as well as ammonia, amino acids, and amines, which reduces the nutritional benefits for that animal. So even though the feed test looks like there's some crude protein, looks like they're pretty similar in between. If both are certainly of good quality, there's a certain chance that about 10% or so of that protein is degraded to that non-protein nitrogen. So that can have some little bit of an impact in your feed quality there. So how do you determine forage quality of your feed? Well, feed test is the biggest. I cannot stress that enough. The feed test results, what you get from a feed test, that really depends what kind of forage quality you actually have, because looking and smelling just doesn't tell everything. I mean, you could have a feed that looks green, smells nice, but is it going to be good quality? You don't know. You actually really don't know until you've sent a feed test away. So feed testing, just a few tiny little tips here, reminders, is use a forage probe. It'd be great to use in a baleage bale, and that'll get you right into the center of the bale. And it gets, forage probe guarantees a much more accurate analysis versus a hand grab sample. A hand grab may not get everything that you want in that bale. So caution, don't use a hand grab sample if you're going to be feeding testing. Make sure you borrow a forage probe from a forage association or account, or your local county, your county office, and then you can use it that way. So you're sampling from, depending on how much bales you have, sample from 10 to 20 random bales. And you just mix those samples in a pail, and you just send in a bread bag full to a lab. And make sure that you seal up those bales after collecting the baleage bales. Otherwise, if you don't, then that could promote some spoilage happening that you didn't think would happen. Even if it's a cold time of year, like November, like going into December. Good idea to do that. So in battling with forage quality issues, we've been hearing lots of people have had some issues with forage quality, some feed that has been heated or some feed that was cut in over mature. The number one priority to help win the battle against the forage quality issue is to feed test. And that doesn't matter whether how good or bad it looks or smells. So the issue with poor quality feed that folks are usually dealing with are included heated or high moisture hay, low moisture unfermented so-called baleage, which could be just stuff that's been put up as cold feed. It's wrapped up, and you open it up, it's just basically the same stuff that you put in when you first build it up. Are you also dealing with stemmy over mature hay or baleage or whatever you have there? And the other thing is that is if you're dealing with the high nitrate feed. So note that usually for poor quality feed, if feed tests come back and you're seeing that it's low in protein, and usually they go to the dry cows. And the reason for that is that cows in their mid-pregnancy are typically at their lowest nutritional plane. There are some exceptions, though. Be very careful with feeding high nitrate feeds. Depending what tests you get back from the lab, some may caution to supplement that feed with non or low nitrate feeds, or if it's really high, to maybe possibly think about not feeding it, but it depends. I can't say anything. Depends on what kind of feed test you actually get, if there is that kind of nitrate feed. The other thing is that feeding on that note, if you're sampling for nitrates in especially in a bale, especially bales that get heated, always good to sample for nitrites as well, because nitrates are actually a lot worse than nitrates. The other exception is that if those feeds have mycotoxins that could play an impact, like which could cause abortion in your cows. The other thing is that you may have some moldy feed which the cows may not want to eat. They were just absolutely refused to feed it. So what's the point in feeding it? Or you may have to consider maybe a little bit different way of feeding it so that they can pick through instead of being forced in a word to have this feed in a bale and eat it up, that kind of thing. The other thing is that save the best feed for the last, or at least for your growing animals. That includes your feeder calves, your lactating cows, and your replacement heifers. Now the question of combining feeds is, could it be done? Is it worth it? Like such as with mixing, combining feeding at the same time, baleage with hay or baleage with straw, that kind of thing. And it really depends on what you actually have on hand. And it also depends on what the feed test results actually say. It also depends largely on what animals you're feeding. So, which depends on their type of the animals you're feeding, the body condition, the timing of calving, all those sort of things. So supplementation may be necessary if at all else. So possibly maybe looking at feeds that may be short in protein and energy and your minerals and vitamins as well. So let's look at the supplementation here. So we're looking at some supplementation options, which are include your 32% beef supplement, which is your standard 32, but it is expensive. So let that not be your only option to go for. There's other options here, as you'll see. Peas are also a good protein supplement option. They are about 24% protein. And just to give you some current prices right now, it's they're currently sitting at $230 per ton. The other option is you got dried distillers grains with solubles, or DDGS, at 42% protein, and right now they're going for $300 a ton as a meal or a pellet. Then you have barley malt sprouts, which are at about the same as peas, 24% protein, and they're probably going about $200 a ton, and that's usually as a meal only. Finally, we have canola meal, if you can get a hold of some, at 36% protein, and they come in a meal at pellet, and they're priced at about $304 per ton for those. So with protein supplementation, you certainly can feed with silage or in the grain, mixing it with the grain. One thing to note is that a lot of these have a high phosphorus content, so you may have to recalculate or relook at the amount of calcium that you're actually giving them, and how much they're getting versus how much those animals need. And byproducts are particularly high in phosphorus, so it's pretty important to really think seriously about that calcium supplementation, so that you can maintain that 2-to-1 ratio in the diet for those animals. And protein supplementation is very important to prevent impaction problems, especially with your low quality roughages. So if you don't provide enough of that protein, the animals, they just they basically get so full of fiber in their rumens that that they just can't utilize enough. So it's basically, I hate to say this, starving to death. It's them starving to death on a full stomach. So that adding that protein will get things moving and get those rumen microbes to utilize that fiber a lot more and then get things moving again. So with protein supplementation, of course, you're going to have to work out the cost per pound of protein supplied within that ration. Now with energy supplementation, I gave you some three fairly common options here. So you got your grains, which primarily are grains. So barley is certainly one supplementation. So barley is about 83% TDN, 12.5% protein, and that's sitting about $200 a ton as a feed grain. With the barley, you only need to process only into 2 or maximum of 3 pieces for better utilization. With oats is a bit lower than barley in your energy, so that's 7.6% TDN. By the way, TDN is total digestible nutrients. It's an energy calculation. And for protein, oats is at 11.3% protein, and they're currently sitting at around 188 to 235, whichever the quality, per ton. Finally, you have wheat, and wheat is the highest in energy than barley or oats. It's 88.9% TDN and certainly higher in protein at 15.6%. And they're currently sitting at $220 a ton. With wheat, even though they look really, really good with the higher amount of energy and protein, they can be a problem because they are pretty prone to cause acidosis or bloat if too much is fed to the animals. So you only need to break into 2 pieces. When you're processing that wheat. It doesn't take much for that wheat to break down, and the amount that you're actually feeding those animals, you're limited to 3 pounds per day for feeders, up to 700 pounds, or to 6 pounds per day for immature cows. Now looking into salt and mineral supplementation, loose product, your loose salt minerals consumed at a higher rate than a block, so 25% higher, which is a good thing. And 75% of the consumption actually occurs at night. So it's a really good idea to place that salt station in the animal's loafing area, and that way they can better utilize it. And typically 100 cows should consume 1 bag of salt per week. If they consume more or less, that's kind of a cost for it. So mixing of salt and mineral is preferred to having 2 different stations, because cows will crave salt. So if there's a station where there's mineral with no salt and there's a station that has a lot of salt, chances are those cows are going to go a lot more often to the station that has the salt versus the one that just has the mineral. It's good to keep in mind. So you're looking at, especially with supplementation with the rations that are green feed, a straw grain ration, cereal baleage, those ones you typically need more calcium and magnesium. And do note that a 2-to-1 mineral is often not adequate to meet calcium and magnesium needs. In a lot of these cases, feedlot mineral is suitable, where you get a 20% calcium, 4% magnesium amount in there. And here's just an example of a home mix for a straw grain ration to feeding to dry, pregnant 1,400 pound cows. So it gives you a bag of limestone, 11 pounds of mag-ox, which is magnesium oxide, and that's adding 17.7 or it's about 17.7 trace mineral salt, or plus with selenium. And always important to add those minerals are really needed. 2.7 pounds of the vitamin A, D, and E, 10 million, and the same for vitamin E of the 50,000. So overall, as a little bit of a closing here, it's really important to watch the cows. Two things to really watch out for. First is your body condition score. When you're looking at body condition score, you're looking on the left side of the animal, not the right, because the right side is where the rumen is. And when you're looking at body condition score, you're looking at the amount of fat covered that's over the ribs, over the hips, the spine, and of course even the tail head. And major thing to note with this is that thinner cows require more nutrition and are a bit more costly to feed and to get weight on, especially this time of year. It's winter. The corner of the calendar date is just around the corner, so they require a bit more nutrition than those well conditioned or fat cows that you have, or that a person has. Second thing to watch for is manure. And manure, the consistency of the manure indicates the protein intake. So some tip here is if you see a loose mineral, that those animals are getting lots of protein. They're loose as a goose, they're just shooting out the back. That means they're getting probably too much, or more than enough protein in their diet. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum is that if they're stacked, if you see, if for instance a cow pie is nice cow pie is a flat pie, you basically with a dimple in the middle, but if it's stacked up, looks like it's stacked or almost looking sort of like a the horse manure, then that means that those animals are not getting enough protein and they need some kind of supplementation to help them out. Now, one final little thing I want to mention here with baleage is when you're dealing with net wrap, and net wrap can be a little bit of a hazard to cows and calves. And cows are certainly not selective eaters. They grab something with their tongue, they'll pull it in. They doesn't really, to me, to the most people, it just doesn't seem like it matters what they're putting into their mouths. So if they're ingesting, or if they're eating the plastic twine or net wrap, they may or may not spit it out. Sometimes they may, other times they may just chew and chew and chew on it until it's down. And that's not a good thing, because that eventually that can accumulate in the reticulum of the animal, and animals certainly can die from the impaction of that plastic wrap in their stomachs. So it's pretty important to remove as much net wrap as possible from the bales, just so that those animals aren't going to be eating so much. And please don't leave it on the bale for the animals to work around. That's just not good practice to do. So that's a wrap, pun intended, for me. If you have any questions, and here's my contact info. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Karen. At this point, I don't see any questions. So what we're going to do, I'm going to turn things over to Tammy Swass. And Tammy is the Executive Director of the Alberta Plastics Recycling Association. And she's also a member of the Agricultural Plastics Recycling Group. And Tammy, I'd like to turn things over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the great presentation, Karen. I learned a lot, and great to hear about some of the feeding options and different nutritional information, very valuable. So yeah, as Caitlin said, my name is Tammy. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Plastics Recycling Association. We help facilitate plastics recycling, and agricultural plastics is one of the big items and files that we've had going on for the last couple decades with the association, but more recently getting into a provincial pilot program for grain bag and twine recycling. And so Oh, sorry, am I still in presenter mode there? I just, something went weird. There we go. Sorry about that. So today I'll talk to you about the pilot project and a little bit more about the work we've been doing. Go through an introduction about how we got to where we are, some of our challenges, those being actually bale wrap and net wrap, two of the items that unfortunately at the moment we don't have recycling markets for. So I'll touch on that as well. And then along with the pilot, which involves a collection for producers to bring materials into collection sites. Some of the other work we've done with the pilot includes a waste characterization, market assessment, and farmer research. And then I'll get into the nitty-gritty on the pilot, where you can take your materials and how to participate. And we'll go from there. So our group that APRA, my organization, belongs to is part of the Agricultural Plastics Recycling Group. And we have representatives from academic institutions, so Olds College, government, Alberta Agriculture and Alberta Environment, as well as the Rural Municipalities Association and different groups on waste and landfill management. We have producer groups, we have recyclers, as I mentioned, like myself, and retailers and manufacturers as well. So we all came together over 2 years ago now, basically looking to work on a solution for managing plastic. So any type of plastic burned at low heat, which would be your typical, fire in the backyard or burning barrel, is extremely hazardous, very unsafe, releases a lot of toxins and furans into the environment, which are cancer causing. So we looked at that and said from previous surveys that a lot of the research had shown that farmers are dealing with their plastic by burning it. They're feeling like they don't have a lot of options to safely recycle or dispose of their plastics, and plastics increase is going up. As Karen shared, there's a lot of value in using bale wrap and being able to feed with that, especially in a year like this year where it was so wet. So there's a lot of value there, but we're hearing more and more from the members of our committee that they really want a way to be able to recycle that or handle that material responsibly. So basically throughout the last few years, we've worked on the pilot. In January of this year, we received $1 million from Alberta Agriculture to run a 3-year pilot program. And again, that's focused on grain bags and twine. And so that leads us to where we are today with what we've branded as the Alberta Ag Plastic Recycle It program. And we hired Cleanfarms as a program operator. So Cleanfarms, for those of you that don't know, if you're familiar with the pesticide container collection sites around the province, Cleanfarms is a steward of those materials. They design and deliver programs and across the country and have over 1,000 different ag retailer and municipal partners that help them achieve those results, and a number of members that are producing those materials and those chemicals that are helping to steward their materials for safe and responsible handling. So we really appreciate their leadership. As I mentioned, they've managed and handled other materials across Canada, including the pesticide containers, unwanted pesticide and old obsolete livestock and equine medications, seed and pesticide bags, and grain bags. They're running that program in Saskatchewan, and as I mentioned, they are now running and are operator for the pilot program here in Alberta. So really the challenge that we have, and there you'll see the materials that we're dealing with as part of the pilot, is finding efficient recycling options. So in any scenario in recycling, there needs to be an end market or a place for that to go. The collection is only the first part, and so we really wanted to use the pilot to test and demonstrate some of what needs to happen to get that grain bag from the field into the collection site and then onto the market. Same with the twine. How can farmers best manage their materials and help responsibly take care of them at the end of life? So in terms of what plastic is out there, just to give you a picture of our characterization study, if you're wondering how much is used around the province, this is our updated characterization that we did completed this summer. And there you can see some of the largest amounts of the plastic being used are twine, silage plastic, and grain bags. And actually bale wrap is right up there as well at 12.5% of usage. And so in terms of numbers or how much that represents, that's about between 7 and 11,000 tons of plastic that's being generated just in Alberta every year on Alberta farms. And so we really look at that as, right now we are focused on grain bags and twine, but we see that we do want to reach out and try to find markets and try to engage on the other plastics as well, because they're all quite in high use and we don't see that changing anytime soon. So in terms of what happens to these materials, I'll talk about the collection a little bit more in a second, but grain bags, we ask farmers to roll the bags and bring them into our collection site. That helps us get the biggest density for shipping and the most efficiency as well for everyone involved. And those bags are washed, shredded, pelletized back into LDPE or low density polyethylene, which is the type of plastic they're made out of. And in one case, which a processor here in Alberta, there's a place where they are able to do that recycling process, and then down the road they're able to turn those grain bags into recycled garbage bags. So that's one market for the material. And for twine, it's there's a couple different options. Again, it's shredded and melted down and pelletized again. And in one market, that material goes back into automotive parts. In another market, we're told it's being made into roofing material and insulation type products. So that gives you an idea when you're bringing it in, what's happening with it. Those are some of the places it's going. And so in terms of viable markets, there are a lack of markets for sure. We do have a lack of infrastructure here in North America. Some international markets exist, although there have been new import restrictions. And we also want to make sure that we're sending the plastic to a place where it's being socially and environmentally or handled in a socially and environmentally responsible way. So again, we try to Cleanfarms is responsible for marketing that material, and they do use 2 recyclers in North America. We do have one additional Canadian facility under construction here in Alberta that will be processing grain bags within the next few months, and the 2 recyclers where we ship twine. So in terms of the producer research, this just gives you a little bit of a picture of the feelings or the feedback that we got from producers on how they handle their plastics. And so one of the main things is that about 75% for the pesticide containers are returning those through the collection program for recycling. When you look at the plastic twine, grain bags, and then get into silage wrap or cover, you see the blue showing up a lot more, which is meaning that those folks are burning or landfilling that plastic. So, and that was what they identified as one of the main ways of disposing their material. However, we do see that there are some positive attitudes, and people are about 75% of the respondents were quite concerned with how they deal with their agricultural plastics. And about 9 out of 10 of the respondents are saying that it's important to them to be able to, very, very concerned or somewhat concerned with how they handle their agricultural plastics. And we did ask them if they would likely participate in the program this year, in the pilot program. And again, 9 out of 10 are very likely or somewhat likely to participate in our pilot and bring their grain bags and their twine in for recycling. And about 9 out of 10 also indicated that they're interested in a permanent solution for the plastic. So as I mentioned earlier, we believe that this pilot, right now we only have funding for 3 years. We would strongly like to see this roll into a permanent program so that farmers continue to have a way to manage their materials. We do need to address some of the logistics and the cost of that what that program would look like, and those are things that we'll be working out as we go through the 3-year pilot. So in terms of collection sites and how you can participate right now in the pilot, we have 20 different sites across the province, and I'll share a link with you later for where you can go to look up these sites. As you can see from the map, they're quite diverse in geography. We purposefully did that to try to give as many different regions access to programs as we could, and we plan to add sites in the next years of the pilot. So if there isn't a site that's close to you, we hope to be able to add more sites, although we are very conscious that this is a pilot, and we're working within our limited budget that we have to run the program. So in terms of how the collection works, we have partnerships with the collection sites, or Cleanfarms has partnerships with the collection sites. It's free to drop off the product. Again, I mentioned twine or grain bags are accepted. At this point in time, we don't have a lot of options for silage plastic. Net wrap is unrecyclable in the mechanical sense, where it's a mix of plastic, and with the organic matter that gets wrapped up in it, it just can't be recycled with the technologies we have at this point in time. And the same with bale wrap. There's one market in Eastern Canada that can take it, and at this point in time, that's the only market we're aware of. And so we recognize the need to focus on some of these other types of plastics, but we did focus on grain bags and twine as sort of the low-hanging fruit for the moment, where we know we can move and actually recycle that material. In some cases, net wrap and bale wrap might be candidates for waste to energy or plastics to diesel type conversion, and which case there are some options in other provinces, although we don't have anything operating in Alberta on this side where we could move that material. So just a side note there. So in terms of the collection sites, Cleanfarms is working with those sites. The sites will help with the collection. Those sites are compensated based on the tonnage that they collect, and they can help producers unload, but not required. And so we always recommend that if you are bringing a load into any of the sites, you call ahead, confirm when they're open, and also what materials they are able to take. So again, grain bags, prepare the bags by rolling securely and tying with twine. Grain bag rollers and compactors are available in some communities, but not all of them. And there's also funding available through the Canadian Agricultural Program, or CAP, and you can look into that as well. There's funding for purchasing your own grain bag roller if it's something that you use often, or we've heard stories of sharing amongst a group of producers and within the community, things like that. Twine, we just ask the twine is placed in recycling bags. Those bags are available at the rural offices or the collection sites, and again, it's just best to try to keep that material dry and as much straw and hay off of it as possible. So here's an example of some of the grain bag rollers that can be used or purchased, and just really ideal for getting the bags nice and tight for transport. That's an example of how we would like it to be. Ideally for this picture, if the bags can be stored the other way so that the snow doesn't and water doesn't melt into the bag, we want to keep them as dry as possible so they can be stacked as opposed to on end, more on the side. That'll help keep some of the moisture from getting into the inner layers. And we don't want any other materials besides grain bags. So sometimes we see a nice tight roll, and then as we unroll it at the processing facility or as it's inspected, we see rocks and other materials, wood and other materials that are not accepted. And this provides or causes great hazard with the equipment and machinery, and it's just just not accepted. So there's an example of the bags again. And then this is how they load them. So a semi truck would come on site, load the bags with a cat, and it's very precise process. They do not want the trucks to be overweight or underweight. So there's quite an efficiency of getting the right weight and the right load in the back. This is an example of twine that would not be accepted at a site. So in this picture, you can see the green is net wrap, the blue and the orange is twine, which is perfectly acceptable, and we can accept any color of twine, but the net wrap is not something that we can process. So as an example, I think this was a picture of a bag that came in and then it got burst open on the site. I think they were trying to move it with some equipment, and when they opened it, they found a bunch of other material inside the bag. So again, not something that we can take. We just want twine only in the bag, and your participation in this goes a long way in ensuring the success of the program and helping to avoid unnecessary costs. So there's a picture of exactly how we want the twine, ideally not knotted, just put into the bag directly as is. And there's another example of some of the guys loading the twine into the back, and then we're also tried to bale it to ship it, which is again getting the most density out of the material so that we can ship it effectively to the market. So I think that was about all I had to share today. I really appreciate your time. And again, we recognize that you may have been interested in markets or in recycling your bale wrap, and we are working on that or discussing what the next step will be. At the moment, we hope you'll take a look if you do use grain bags and twine, and look to participate at your closest collection site. And in order to find more information about that, you can either contact me or you check out the website at cleanfarms.ca, Alberta Ag Plastic Recycle It program. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Tammy. And reminder, if people do have questions, just type them in the question box, and I will ask them to Tammy or Karen. So that was a really great overview of the pilot project. Tammy, just a question: any surprises or key learnings from the first year since you launched this program?
So we just actually launched it at the beginning of October, and so we do have some learnings from other sites because there have been collection sites across the province on a municipal by municipal basis, depending on the scope or the intention of each municipality. They've sort of run their own program, so we're learning a lot from those programs that have already been in existence. And yeah, as we go, just getting things set up so that not all full 20 sites are on board yet, but they will be hopefully by the end of this year. And as we roll in, there's definitely just a lot of things to learn, and just regional differences. So we're going to have collection. Some communities have partnered with retailers so that producers can bring their material back to a municipal site or a retailer site. There's I guess we just continue to be more, I guess, amazed than surprised at the great collaboration and the interest in everyone to participate and really be engaged in this pilot. So we're thankful so far for all the interest.
Yeah, it's a fascinating program. We have a couple questions. What can we do with silage wrap for now?
Yeah, so for now, we don't, as I mentioned, there are a couple markets that are taking silage wrap. It's not part of our program. Depending on where you live, you can check with your municipality. Very few in the province are accepting it just because they have those challenges finding markets for it. We recommend just taking it to landfill at this time, unless you're really keen and you have a dry place to store it. If you can roll it and you want to keep it with the potential of a program coming up, that's one thing. We find not a lot of people have that, and it does ideally need to be a inside dry place to do that. So unfortunately at this point in time, like I said, you can look into it or with your municipality, or landfill unfortunately is the best option at this point.
So very limited options for that then.
Very limited, yes.
Right. Okay, and we have one more question, but I'll just, again, if others have questions, please type them in the question box and I can ask them. Our next question, is there any research being done into plastic alternatives?
Yeah, actually, there is. There's some research being done, and I learned more about this a couple weeks ago of a group here in Alberta that's working on something, and I've heard more about research overseas in the UK on a compostable or perhaps even edible net wrap that could be used on the bales and then eaten or consumed by the animal in a safe non-hazardous way. So there is research. I don't know, or I can't comment on how soon that may be available. I think we know from our experience and research that plastic seems to be widely used and accepted because of all the benefits that come with it. And so I think that's one of the challenges, is developing alternatives that are equally as keep the bales dry and keep your bale together with the net wrap and things like that. Interestingly, I know sisal twine back in the day was made from hemp, and I think there's not a lot of sisal twine being used anymore. So it's sort of looking at what alternative options there are, but also can they meet the same efficiencies, and are there ways to reduce use? So I know a lot of farmers have said they don't like to use grain bags, but in a season like this, or in a case where they may be farming fields further away from their grain bins, it's a temporary storage option that is necessary for them. So we do hear about farmers trying to reduce the use of plastic where they can, but it does have its benefits. So definitely keeping an eye and an ear to the to the ground on other options for sure.
A follow-up to this one, Tammy, the same participant would like to know if you know the names of the companies doing the research.
Yeah, for sure. I don't have that at my fingertips because I've got my screen on present mode. I've got it in my email. If that person would like to fire me an email, I'd be happy to send that information on.
Okay, great. And then a follow-up from the first question about the silage wrap. The participant would like to know, are there any successful ways of baling silage wrap?
And that's another one. So with this pilot, we've heard of a few different things with silage plastic where it can be rolled. I know it does come off in strips or in pieces, and it can be a lot more difficult to get into a bale. One of the municipalities, I think it was Rocky View, had instead of a round baler, they were doing more of a vertical horizontal baler, and then tying it that way. So there are examples of communities that have done it successfully in the past. It's just maintaining those markets to be able to move that plastic. And in terms of on-farm use, I think that's one of the areas we've identified where we still need to get more research and info into what the best way is for farmers to bring that material into a collection site.
All right, thank you for that. I don't see any further questions, so I'd like to thank you, Tammy, and you, Karen. Great presentation today, good overviews of a couple of different focuses when it comes to what we were talking about today. And a reminder to our participants that you will receive an email with a link to the recording of today's program. So if you would like to forward that on, if someone is interested in this whole area, please feel free to do so. Any final comments from Karen or Tammy before we close things off?
No, I don't think so. Thanks very much for the opportunity. And again, please, if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to visit the website. There's some FAQs there, or reach out to me directly.
Yeah, no, nothing else for me. Just I left my contact info on there, so if they want to get in touch with me, they can do that way. And thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you to both. Thank you to our participants, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.